Okay, so those of you who know me know that I never, ever, ever run over time. It's always a pleasure, actually, to follow my old colleague from the Center for Digital Media, Kim Voll, because she sets things up so incredibly well. And many of the things that she's going to talk about, I'm going to refer to as the horizontal. I know that doesn't mean anything to you now. Hopefully by the end of the talk it will. So I'm going to talk about ethical and normative rules for artificial intelligence-enabled content. We're not going to take on anything really serious today. We'll deal with legal standards for detailed big data. We'll look at what level of consent is required. We'll look at the very simple problem of how artificial intelligence tools can serve to divide, fragment, and polarize society. Just a few seconds on that because we have a full answer. We'll talk about behaviorism and humanism and where AI plays into either or both. Another light topic, will AI destroy the world? And can AI save humanity? And then a few kind of tentative takes on how to regulate AI and where we should be leading into regulation and where we shouldn't be. So, first question. What's the legal standard that should be applied to kind of big data that's very revealing of personal habits? Well, we don't have a lot of cases. We have, but the most interesting materials and perhaps the most applicable have to do with smart utility meters that, may not sound that interesting, but if you think about how much data utility meters can collect, especially smart ones, and how they can be analyzed, you get an idea. And the EU has certainly looked at this, but we've got a couple of court cases from the US. Really interesting case from a town called Napierville, where the town of Napierville was collecting very detailed data through smart meters, and a collective arose to fight that. And the courts, this is the US Court of Appeal, found that collection of smart meter data was indeed a search for US constitutional purposes, but was a reasonable one because it was being done essentially for environmental and efficiency purposes and not done for enforcement purposes. So the data was not being used against you. It was being used for the purposes of the city and for the purposes of the environment. Contrast that to the US Supreme Court case in Carpenter versus the United States, a criminal law case, very recent case where the government, without a search warrant, got 12,898 location points cataloging an individual's movements, Carpenter's movements, over 127 days. And it will surprise you not that that was an unreasonable search and seizure. The purpose of the collection was in the context of a criminal charge. So it was definitely being used against Carpenter. So the two common denominators I want you to focus on is that we are talking about a standard of search and seizure that is accepted, but it's in the context of a constitutional background where the action is against government. You don't have the same right of action against Google and Facebook. Google and Facebook are people, after all, and they have rights in a constitutional context against government, but we don't have constitutional rights against them any more than we do against other people. So our right of action is inhibited. The second common denominator to focus on is that the data was, whether the data was collected and used against the data's originator. So this is very meaningful. The question for Facebook and Google is, are you using my data against me? And if so, what are the implications of that? If you were government, Google and Facebook, I'd surely have a right of action if you were using my data against me. Do I have when you're not government? So, second question. If platforms want such level of data, what's the level of consent? Now, we can talk about the law of consent for hours and days and months, but I'm just going to give you a very simple proposition. This is from Facebook's current end-user license agreement. To provide these services, we must collect and use your personal data, and you must agree to our data policy. Whatever the requisite level of consent is, I put it to you, it's not this. It must be higher than this. Where you have, where as against government, it's a constitutional right that the courts take extremely seriously when government is going after extremely personal data, and there's barely any threshold when companies are getting the same level of data and perhaps even more. Because remember, the companies are analyzing it in psychological terms, and I doubt that there's a lot of psychology being applied to your smart meter data, although of course it could be. All of that leads to this article that I just want to bring to your attention called The Duty to Read the Unreadable. It's a fantastic and fantastically important article that basically says, for I think sound legal reasons, that almost all these end-user license agreements are ab initio illegal because they are not being read. The level of education required is too great. Everybody knows it, and we're living in a fiction. And I think we've all known that, but this is the article, the academic legal article that I think states it most articulately. Okay, so I promised you we'd get to this. How does AI actually serve to divide, fragment, and polarize us? Now, before I go much further, those of you who've been here before know that I've taken kind of a rather negative view of AI in the past and talked about legal constraints that are required. It will surprise you, and certainly surprise you so far in my talk, when I say to you I'm actually taking ultimately a very positive view of AI, or at least trying to show the promise of AI in a positive way. But first, let's talk about the negative stuff. How does AI actually, what's the mechanic for how we're divided, fragmented, and polarized? And, I think most of us will acknowledge that the world feels more polarized, fragmented, and divided than ever before. So how does AI play into that? So you may, those of you who've taken undergrad psychology, be acquainted with the theory of cognitive dissonance. Basically, the theory holds that we as humans strive for internal psychological consistency, and if something inconsistent comes into our world, we will do one of two things generally. We'll ignore it to preserve our internal consistency, or we will rationalize the position we've previously taken. Very rarely will we ever change our mind. And there's this wonderful book called When Prophecy Fails, where a group of psychologists embedded themselves in 1957 with an end of the world group that was saying that the world was going to end on October 30th, and they wanted to see what would happen when the world didn't end. And when the world didn't end, the leader of the group took the stage and said, you may have noticed that the world didn't end yesterday, and the reason it didn't is because of all the good work that all of you have done, and we must redouble our efforts because the world is ending on December 1st. So not like, oh, we were wrong. People who have kind of a minimal attachment may go, wow, I was wrong about that. But most people will not want to admit they're wrong. So think about this mechanic, and think about how the world has changed over the last 20 years. Part of the video game industry, and certainly the indie scene, is we've so completely, and for such good reasons, and to such good effect, democratized the tools for creation. To be a creator, you no longer have to be a television station or a filmmaker or have a printing press. It's accessible to everybody. It's a little annoying that everybody on Instagram thinks they're an artiste, but that's okay. But that's where we're at. As a result, think of your own Twitter feed. We take positions much sooner than we used to. We didn't used to opine on everything and opine on everything right away. Now add cognitive dissonance to that. Once you've opined, you're unlikely to back off your position. You're more likely to redouble it. You add artificial intelligence-enabled virality, which is what we have, you get polarization. If you want to look at a more complete picture, now add filter bubbles, add that we seem in that environment to actually, where everybody's speaking, whoever speaks the loudest and the most extremely is likely to get heard. We're in that squeaky wheel, gets the grease, but magnified in the digital world. So when you do all of that, when you get through filter bubbles and all the mirroring, how are you ever going to change your mind about anything? It's so unlikely. And so I think that's where we get to the polarization. This is an article from just a few days ago that actually pretty well talks about the mirroring effect. It doesn't have anything about cognitive dissonance and how we got here, but that's my theory. So let me now just pretend that I care how much time has gone by. Okay. So here's a question, because I've said AI can be good or bad. Does AI favor behaviorism, or does it be, or humanism, free will? Yes, no, both, either. All four answers are correct. It's not the technology. Those of us who've lived in this world long enough know that it's really not the tools. It's what we do with the tools that matters. And that's where I want to guide you. This is just a very good article from the New Yorker that says AI can be used for good or bad, which is what I'm saying. Those of you who don't know behaviorism, B.F. Skinner proved that if you electrify a grid, you can get a mouse to do anything. Not really a shocking result, but there is a behavioristic view of the world, which is quite vertical, which we'll talk about. And behaviorism versus humanism is a much debated subject, and I've given you a good video from the 60s if you want to look at it. Let's talk about behaviorism in video games. Let's talk about the rat in the wheel and how we train them. So leaderboards in video games are, quite behavioristic. That doesn't mean they're awful, but I just want you to think about the modalities. Loot boxes are very behavioristic. You are definitely the hamster in the hamster wheel when you're doing loot boxes, and if you're doing them repetitively, as Gaetano said yesterday, sometimes it's not even a game. It stops being a game at a certain point because there are no game elements. It's just hamster wheel after hamster wheel. I got addicted to this game. It's the only game I've spent a lot of money kind of $2 at a time or $5 at a time. Sometimes as you get more addicted, $15 at a time. It's called Real Racing 3. But I wanted, before I get into the part about spending money, I just want to give you kind of a little bit of the good part of AI, or you may not think it's good. And that's when you're racing, and if you are really good and you get too far ahead, the AI cars will catch up to you and give you a harder race. And if you're really slow and bad like I am, they'll slow down for you so that you're always engaged. And it's always personal to you, whether you're good or bad. But then you add this in-app purchase structure. This is sort of self-explanatory. The real behavioristic danger, of course, is addictive gameplay. And I'm not going to get into it, but do find in the gaming press, I'm not sure I know how to pronounce his name, so I'll just go with his first name, Andrew from Oxford University, criticizing the ESA and through them the industry around not being serious and intentionally, I guess this is the hardest charge, intentionally misrepresenting academic research data. It echoes a little bit of the worries Gaetano and I were talking about yesterday. But this all, when we're talking about behaviorism, it feels authoritarian. It's very much top-down. It's the vertical. Think of it as vertical control. Think about all the things Kim talked about as the horizontal. Players talking to players and the technology enabling that, because that's ultimately where we're going to go. Let's talk about humanism and free will in video games. Nothing is better than the controller. The controller is more than a metaphor. It is truly your freedom stick. Minecraft, very humanistic, very open, very flat universe. You're not controlled by above. You're determining your own destiny. Open worlds are particularly humanistic in that sense. They are particularly the horizontal. If we are intellectually honest with ourselves, and everyone in this room I think is more or less a gamer, the behaviorist part of it is no fun. Being compelled to do things is not nearly as much fun as wanting to do something. And they are clearly not the same thing, and they don't feel the same. So think about the horizontals and, think about everything Kim said and put it into that slide, because that's where it belongs. We've seen this before. Do some reading on alternative schools in the 1960s and how it flattened everything. And everyone who's here, who's an academic, I think will tell you that we owe a lot in terms of flipping classrooms, group work, and generally how we teach and teach with respect to alternative schools and their evolution in the 60s and the 70s. Next question, will AI destroy the world? Maybe. I mean, Elon Musk believes that. I believe that Elon Musk is more likely to destroy the world than AI, but we can move on from there. Things we've seen, AI, took a road trip and wrote a terrible novel. Well, that's not going to destroy the world. Fake resumes being done by AI with composite pictures, that's not going to destroy the world. I've actually referred some of my students to this site to get a good idea of how to lay out a good resume. DeepMind AI playing Quake 3, it may wound our pride, but it's certainly not going to destroy us. This is a silly. Spotify making a playlist based on your DNA. But there is some really dystopic stuff. We know all about psychopath AIs, not just because of MIT, but because of Microsoft's experiments. We definitely know how the advertising industry is using AI, and we know how this is being used to teach us. You can read this Dilbert cartoon, but basically, last few bits of it are what started as simple entertainment, evolved into military-grade mind control, and then Dilbert says to his cohorts, "Did you hear any of that?" And they say, "Any of what?" So, yes, the mind control part is the fear. The bias part is the real thing we have to wrestle with. And there's lots of that. And I think successfully we will wrestle it. I don't know what to make of Valve software, saying they want to analyze your brainwaves for in-game rewards. I want to know more. This is the most disturbing one to me. This is a startup that is going to look at your eyes and make sure you're watching ads from start to finish before you're shown the content you really want. Going to just flip through all the China stuff, which you're probably all acquainted with, AI being used to effectively control the population. So, core things. Can AI save humanity? Yes, if AI can serve the uniquely personal. Now again, think about all the things Kim was talking about, and that was connecting person to person across the horizontal and not focusing on the vertical. And Paul Gardner talked about this in his talk yesterday morning, but I'm going to look at it a slightly different way. All these branching narratives, the fact that Netflix thinks Fortnite is its biggest competitor means that Netflix movies are going to become more like Fortnite, and that's indeed what's happened with Bandersnatch. Look at this. This is a little map of Bandersnatch. It's not the most sophisticated map out there, but some of you may think, well, that looks a little bit like a very, very early branching video game. And so we see that this was very interesting. Netflix records all your Bandersnatch choices and then feeds back to you what you want. So now your decision making is known to Netflix. Bandersnatch, in their view, is a hit. They're going to do more of it. They've now, with this series called Love, Death, and Robots, they're actually changing the order of the episodes depending on who you are. They're tailoring the order of the episodes, not the episodes themselves, based on their judgment about your personality, which is really interesting, and we're increasingly get more and more personal. They're also going into old video games, so you start wondering whether they're going to do shows about shows with video game roots and introduce the Bandersnatch mentality. And then, of course, the video game industry, who many of you are part of, are saying, hey, we're the ones who originated all of this personalization. We should be the ones making money on it. So, and finally, if you want a job with DeepMind as a game developer, I mean, it sort of tells you where everything is going. Will Wright is working on a kind of ultra-personalized game where you will feed in your memories, not mechanically, but just yourself. And all of this is quite post-structural. All of this is, we are all very individuated. This is a quote from Mary Meeker. I want to show you the two sides of this, and then we're going to get very close to the end. In the 2017 Kleiner-Perkins Internet Trends Report, Mary Meeker, with a lot of help from some video game people, postulated this, that perhaps interactive gaming, evolution, growth, usage, with related data collection, analytics, real-time simulations, call it AI, and engagement has been helping prepare society for the ongoing rise of human-computer interaction. In other words, we will be the Borg, and this is helping us become the Borg. And that's very behaviouristic, structural, and quite pessimistic. I look at it the opposite way. AI is proving that we are individuals. AI is proving that we are all different from each other. And if we can get AI to continue to prove that, AI can be a tool of liberation. I don't know if anybody has seen or if it's available in the UK. This is a little camera from Google where all the AI is in the camera. The neural network is in the camera, and nothing gets uploaded to the internet. And it just sits there, and it recognizes your cat and your dog and your baby, and when there's movement that the AI thinks is interesting, it takes photos. I need to get a copy of this. I need to get one of these for Gaetano, who has a new baby. But that's AI for good and not AI in the cloud. So a couple of quick conclusions. If we're going to get AI along the horizontal, we have to value human agency, the truly human. You saw Kim, I think, speak about it more than I ever could. And if we lose our human agency, if the AI is manipulating us along the vertical axis, that's when the law needs to step in and intervene. So I formulated a test a couple of years ago. I'm not going to repeat it, but I think there is a level at which that legal intervention should happen. We have to enhance the horizontals. We have to think peer-to-peer, human-to-human, and we have to de-emphasize and arc away from the network-to-peer control. What I'm really saying is resist the behaviorist. And I'll be very clear, and I think loot boxes are a good example in a weird way. The more behaviorist we become, the more likely there will be and should be legal intervention. The more peer-to-peer we are, a lot of things Kim was talking about in terms of enabling connectivity, the less likely. Now, one or two kind of final points. I think it's important to separate the storytelling from the platform. The expression is not the technology. Both may have rules, both may require something, but I wouldn't be able to do that artistry even if I was on the same platform board. And that's a bit unusual because Marshall McLuhan said the medium is the message, and he's Canadian and I'm Canadian, but I found you a better quote. We shape our tools and then our tools shape us. So the medium and the message are a dialectic, and I think that's real. We need to bend the undisclosed and the unclear, so we really do need to standardize contracts. We need to have real consequences, real remedies. I talked a couple of years ago about constructive trust. That, because of a court case, is now substantially easier to implement as a remedy. But information fiduciaries, which has been talked about by Jonathan Zittrain and Jack Balkin in the United States, and giving people individual rights of action, I think is the key. If you want any more info on kind of video game law at UBC and what we're doing and discussing often around these things, here's the website. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. We are the survivors, apparently. Can I suggest we give ourselves a round of applause? I promise I'll keep it sweet and short and simple.